This is an LA CTO Forum production.
Welcome to Exception Handlers, the podcast where CTOs debug the challenges that keep us up at night. I'm Alex.
And I'm Bill.
And on today's episode, we are delighted to welcome David Zubar, CEO of Interna, to talk to us about product and engineering. David, great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we get into it, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Because I think you're really uniquely positioned to have this conversation with, and I think our listeners would find that interesting.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. So I run Interna. What we do is we work on product management, engineering, and how do you best ship product? And we work with VCs and PE firms and their portfolio companies. And we're often called either before an investment to just do due diligence. We're called after investment when a company is starting to scale and they cobbled it together, product management engineering. And when I say they, product management engineering is our sole focus. And so they cobbled it together, starting to scale. What got them here isn't going to get them there. And so we help evaluate what the teams do. We'll then sometimes an investor or a CEO or a CTO will say, can you run this group on an interim basis and help us get it to the next level? Or they might say, can you coach our CTO or our chief product officer and help that person take the group where it needs to go? So you can think about it. The first step is very much like a diagnosis and a prescription. And then I would say oftentimes, almost every time, the companies then ask us to help us execute the prescription. And so we've worked with smaller companies you've never heard of. We've worked with the Walt Disney Company. We worked with Lynda.com before they got sold to LinkedIn. And we're doing this for 14 years.
That's amazing. And exactly the person we want to talk to about product and engineering, because you're perfectly positioned to have all kinds of insights. So let's get into it. I think the first topic we want to kind of explore is, as product and engineering are being heavily impacted by AI and its capability, the lines are blurring, and we've talked about this before in the podcast, and the line between product and engineering is becoming less clear. So from your view, where is that line now, given what AI is doing to everybody?
So I think it's true to say it's becoming less clear, and I think it's going to keep becoming less clear, and that's going to continue to shift. So I'm going to answer your question, then I'm going to try to answer it more broadly than you asked it. So where is that line? In some respects, the line is the same and disambiguated. And what I mean by that, what we used to talk about product management commonly was really product ownership. How do I write user stories? How do I manage a sprint? Some things that really shouldn't have been product management, but either were because the nature of the way that we develop software, or just things got conflated. I don't want to run it. I don't want to hire someone to run be a scrum master. I'm going to make my product owner do it. All of that cruft is getting cleared out. And my argument is what product management is doing is or should be doing is now more and more like pure product management. How do I conceive of the product? Who do I serve? Why do we serve them? What are we going to produce for them? Engineering, and I will add one layer of complication that this makes this more accurate in a moment. Engineering is still responsible for writing code, but while we're clearing out some of that cruft in the middle, it's easy for product management to now do some engineering stuff, engineering to do some product management stuff in the ways that either they were too busy before or didn't have the tooling before to let them do. And so where's that line drawn? It depends who your product managers are, what skills they have to do real product management, and what insight they have to do engineering, what engineers you have, what skills they have to do real engineering and have insight into product management. But the world is becoming where a product manager can easily, and I'm not telling people anything they don't know, easily do at least good vibe-coded prototypes and maybe can actually write some decent code, where an engineer can really do some useful real specifications. And by specifications, I really mean vibe coded prototypes. And them both engage in how do we build a product that creates value.
Yeah. So there is the messiness. So just to paraphrase, if you think about the whole product to engineering kind of spectrum, on one end, somebody who understands the product, the market, the fit, and the feature set. And on the other end, somebody who's responsible for actually building all that. The middle used to be a little bit clearer because neither side could do the other side's work. So sometimes product did some stuff and sometimes, but now somebody said this in a different conversation. With AI, everyone can do everybody else's jobs poorly. And so suddenly you've got kind of both fronts attacking the same middle. And it's, to your point, depending on who's involved, it could look very different. What a product organization looks like and where the boundaries are, and what the engineering organization looks like and where those boundaries are.
Yeah. Well, and here's the good news. I mean, there's two pieces of good news. We can produce a lot of stuff a lot faster. And you can define stuff as good stuff or crap, right? You can produce a lot faster. The fundamental first principle thing is the job of product management and the job of engineering. And I've been saying this for years and years and years, and even before the onset of AI, is the job of product management engineers jointly to produce a product that creates value for the users. That does not change.
Right.
And
Right.
one of the problems with product management before was a lot of people thought their job was to write user stories. A lot of the job as engineers thought their job was to write code. A lot of the crappy thing about being an engineer is no one saw the value in what you created unless you were a pure technology company. And so you always became a cost center. Both sides now have a chance to leverage AI to create value for the users and create value for the company in a more fundamentally measurable thing.
Can I jump in real quick? Are you seeing a difference in the actual documentation or the communication mechanism itself as to what is a handoff? Because in the old days, there were traditional things that were passed from one side to the other, and now as you're starting to see this blurring, is it here's my prototype? I'm going to text you a URL, or are you seeing things which are the emergence of new types of documents, or it's just a shift and it's kind of malleable depending upon who the players are?
The answers are yes and yes and yes.
Clears it up.
Is there are a lot more prototypes, and the advantage of that is the advantage and disadvantage is the lack of documentation allows us to communicate faster and with less formalism. The disadvantage of that is, boy, so many people can create prototypes now. So many people think that they're product managers. It kind of feels like the days where every CEO thought they were Steve Jobs. And I know the exact number of Steve Jobs that currently exist in the universe. There had been one, right? And so the communication stream is more fluid, and given a healthy environment, that's great. And given the environment where product managers and engineers come together and saying, this is what we're delivering together, that in-between communication pattern, that fluid communication pattern, I produce prototypes, here's some code, what do you think of the code? Oh, I don't like it because the architecture sucks, but we want to do this with the architecture, but we're going to use code X to help us do that. And since I'm the engineer, I can think about that. That fast communication pattern is terrific if it's encapsulated.
Well, it's interesting to the point of yes, yes, and yes. We had a panel discussion last week about this very topic, and different people presented, myself included, about what kinds of artifacts are we sort of creating to do these handoffs. And basically, there were 4 different answers to how do you go from product engineering. And I bet you they're all right and they're all wrong at the same time. And also, no one knows what the right answer is. And also, it's contextual, and also, and so, and on and on and on. I think just the Cambrian explosion of options that is emerging out of this new world of you could do a bunch of stuff. What's the right answer here? Makes it both easier to express yourself and harder to know how much is too much, what's the right fidelity, where, who is responsible for each part of this. It's really a fascinating world.
Yeah. Well, and I almost didn't answer your question, right? And let me take another revolution around it to better answer your question. Is there's two kinds of documentation that I want to see, and I was hinting at this before: the external documentation of the product management engineering group to the outside world, and the internal communication patterns within the group, the internal documentation within the group. And I much more care about the external communication patterns, and I think it's much more fraught to get them wrong now than it was before, than I care about the internal patterns, because I hold the internal patterns are going to continuously change. We're going to get a new LLM model from, from some large, frontier provider tomorrow, another one next week, and another one the day, and that's going to change the patterns, and the tooling around that's going to change. Anything that we decide today that's exactly right will be exactly wrong tomorrow. And so I care much more about is the fluidity among the conversation in the group. Okay, so now I sort of helped you, but I actually have not. Because I didn't say, okay, what do I want today? And it does those four, as you were pointing out, those four answers that we got in the last conversation that we had, the CTO forum meeting, presented four that were different. I would like to see in a general one, in a B2B standpoint, particularly in a regulated standpoint, something that is a little bit more arduous, more detailed in what we're going to produce between engineering and product management, something more akin to what we've done in the past, because we have to.
Sure.
Because there's regulations where users absorb products more slowly and they need to know what they're doing, that forces upon us something that looks more formalized. Would I want Scrum? No, I'd probably want something like Kanban, but I'd want it more formalized. In a B2C where people could absorb things quickly, I just want conversations. I want conversations as fast as possible. I don't care if I have them written down. And I think demos and drawing on screens and putting in dots, because I can release so quickly, because I can find out what's right or wrong so quickly, I want the lightest weight conversation possible.
And that makes perfect sense. And that's something you ticked off as one of my personal grievances over the last 10 years. And that's the whole Scrum thing, which has become this repetitive mechanical thing that must be done for the sake of being done. And I think that that's being disassembled as we have these, to your point, huge shifts every time a model comes out in terms of what the tooling is going to be, and that reflects how the communications are going to work, et cetera. And it's going to come down to being adept at using a variety of tools to communicate with each other, as opposed to a mechanism that has been codified.
That's right.
I mean, a lot of this just kind of comes down to, you have to think about, why are all the artifacts that we used to use exist, right? What purpose are they serving? And some of them, to your point, they're there because there needs to be a formality because of the industry you're in, the nature of the work you do, the types of people and users involved. And others are sort of there because that's what we used to do. And whether you still need them or not really depends on what you could do now. That's a transition I think everybody kind of is grappling with. So actually, maybe this is a good time to transition to another part of this, which is, it seems like at the end of the day, whatever way or mechanism you want to hand information off from product to engineering, a lot of that revolves around kind of managing context, right? So whether that's managing context for the agent building stuff or managing context about the thing you're trying to design, how do you think about like managing that context in this new world? Like, whose responsibility is it? What does that look like? Just some specifics and particulars that maybe you've seen in the companies you work with on that.
Yeah, so the management of context, I do bifurcate, which is, there's not one kind of context. There's context about the product from the user perspective. There's context about the product from the engineering perspective. There's context about product about where it lives in the infrastructure of the organization. And I'm talking here about the technology infrastructure, but maybe somewhere else. And I'm talking, by the way, very much from a product management engineering focus. I know that's not necessarily internal IT development. That I'm sure has its own changes to this. And I think managing the context is perhaps the most important issue for product management to do and for engineering to do. And I think it falls out very normally or very in expected fashion is the context about the product and the competitors in the market. Of course, that's product management. The context about the engineering and the architecture and the integrations and the MCP or APIs you have to call, of course, that's engineering. And those have to be managed, and those should be versioned, and those should be thought of. And when I think about these, I had this admin that worked for me. And in some ways, he was the best admin that ever worked for me because he was the worst admin that ever worked for me.
High praise.
Right. It was, and I was constantly giving him context about what we do as a company and who our clients were and why it was important. And when LLMs came out, I'm not going to say this gentleman's name, but I referred to the LLM by this gentleman's name. Because it was literally, I was giving this guy context again and again and again. And he was great. He was a great trainer for me, for LM. And so that's the way I think about it. I don't think the question is who is responsible for context. I think the question was who's responsible for which context. And I think that very much falls into the org design patterns that we generally had. Now, to Bill's point, or maybe it was to Alex's point, one of you guys said this, I've already lost track. When you have new tools, you have new processes. We ask ourselves which processes make sense, which don't. We also have built org designs to support the tools and processes we have. So I think we need to revisit and say, okay, my QA department looks different. What do I have? Like, all of this should be getting automated to the extent it wasn't. My manual testers, like all those go. Okay, great. The QA job should have been, often wasn't, automated QA tests so the engineers can run them, not to run them themselves. To the extent you believe that's true, the QA department should create the QA context and version that. The architect, who was either generally overpowered or underpowered in every organization, either the architect was God and everyone had to follow him and disempower all the engineers below them, or the architect had no power and they were just kind of thought leaders that people didn't lead their thoughts. The architects own the architect context. Now they're appropriately powered. Actually, Riot Games really had a good way of thinking about RFCs and thinking about architecture that way. It's published on their site. I suggest people look at it. And I think that if you look at your org chart, if you clear out the cruft in your org chart based on what you need today, then it becomes natural who owns which context. Product management, I mentioned before. There's go-to-market stuff. Like when we release a product, we need to release a whole bunch of stuff around that. Who owns that? Well, the go-to-market folks. Those are probably out of product and engineer, but they're part of the conversation. And so that's the way I think about it.
Along those lines, which makes perfect sense to me, today we hear a lot of talk about the context. But the reality is that we either have this amazing poly context, which I've never seen one, or there's a whole series of contexts. And I'm wondering if that's not a place where in the future you see maybe more work being done, clearly defining these different types of contexts, because ultimately things like responsibility and accountability be tied back to them.
I think that's right. And that, in the history of computer science, I'm going to go back in my personal history. I started my career doing research and development in AI and ML. And so finally, it's useful. So
it took a long time.
Yeah, it took. Thank you. Thank you. Having a lot more data and compute and some nice new architectures. But the history of computer science would suggest to us we keep getting more and more powerful languages that express what we want the computer to do. Context is a just more powerful language I know I'm oversimplifying it, but I don't think it's wrong. A more powerful language with a more powerful processor underneath it, a more powerful interpreter compiler. If you think of the LLM like that, then you start thinking about context as programming language. And the actual programming language, in this case, is whatever your natural language is, English or Chinese or Spanish or Hebrew, or pick your favorite. And then we start thinking about context in that as a more powerful language from when we went to, bits to assembly to COBOL to Fortran to Pascal to there's some history there. And eventually we get to Python and then we get to this and then 3 days from now I'll be at Nirvana, I'm sure, because it always works that way. And that's the question to ask, I think, is how do we manage these contexts as programming? And then that goes back to your first question. What's the job of the product manager? Because they need to be thoughtful about how they express it, because they're, at the end of the day, expressing a computer language.
Yeah, every now and then we talk about how the natural language is a poorly bounded programming language, and that's that's what we're now all writing code in, basically. So the one thing that's interesting about this conversation is, obviously knowing where to manage context and what kinds of context is important. But I feel like with AI, especially for product managers, they're being exposed to stuff that they haven't been exposed to before. So, in my experience, all of a sudden people are thinking about vibe coding prototypes, which has never even been a thing before. They've never thought about what that entails. Now sometimes you're asking a product manager to start thinking like an engineer in that sense. Tell the machine what it needs to do. And part of that, engineers are good at defining context in the code that they write, because that's how they get the machine to do their bidding. And product managers have not really had to do stuff like this because they couldn't, and this just was not in their purview, but it is kind of now. How do you think about that? What do you tell them about how they should go about operating in this new world where they do need to think about stuff they've never thought of before?
It's not clear whether we have the right product managers in the world.
Yeah.
Right. So the answer to your question is no, actually, tell it to me as a human. We'll get to you telling it to the LM, but tell it to me as a human. And I'm going to, as an ignorant human, see if I understand what you're telling me. And I'm going to train you in that method to the extent that we've hired people that have those skills. The problem with product management is it is a job that's never been well defined, partially for the reasons that we said before. And so, boy, this is going to make me unpopular. Some of these people are not going to survive in this role, not because AI doesn't need them. It's because, for whatever reason, we've hired for people that used to be a designer. And maybe those designers are really good at making things pretty, but really not good for specifying what it is to do. And maybe they have the skills to do it. Maybe they can move there.
Well, let me actually ask you a spicy question about this. So when we talked to Eric Herring a few episodes ago about what makes a good engineer in the age of AI, and he made almost verbatim the point you're making about engineers. Some will not survive the transition because, for whatever reason, they're not in the right mindset to do well in this new world. Code fetishists are not going to survive. So naturally, then the question is, what does a good product manager look like in the world of AI? What is it that they need to be doing, skills that they need to have that makes them uniquely positioned to take advantage of this?
So I worked with this guy named Bob Breton, and he introduced me to Bob Breton's law of lying. And Breton's law of lying is the following thing. You should be able to say anything you need to express in 2 sentences to make it concise. And then my corollary was you should be able to say in 2 sentences, in 2 paragraphs, and 2 pages. The good product manager needs to be able to operate on all those levels of granularity in ways that are well understood. A really good organization a good mechanism that this is done by is Amazon has the 6-pager. So it's a 6-page report that you have to produce before, any meetings, but any of the important meetings that You have to express exactly, and it's specifically formatted and thought of. And then it has a bunch of background information. And before you go into Amazon meetings, people sit down and read that 6 page that you previously spent 2 weeks producing. And the first 20 minutes, the 1 hour meeting is reading that. The good product manager has that mindset of being able to distill what you want to do at those various levels of granularity, that 6 page and that background information, Brenton's law of lying on two sentences, 2 paragraphs, 2 pages, in the way that you and I, who are ignorant about what that person has, can say it and that we can grok it.
Yeah. I mean, what kind of training do you need for that kind of skill set to develop? Right? I mean, are humanities making their comeback? Because you're more likely to be trained to do it that way if you're doing something in the humanities versus hard sciences.
I don't think humanities are sufficient to do it, and I don't think hard sciences are necessarily insufficient to do it.
Okay. Fair.
Humanities, depend. Look, by the way, if you sing opera, that's your humanities. That's lovely. I don't think that's going to help you here.
True.
Right. So I think it gets. I think you're constantly asking. I think it's a person who can constantly A, be curious, but B is why. Why are we doing this? And I think the third question I would ask is, how do I explain this to someone at different levels? Because eventually at the LLM, you're going to have to explain it to various levels of degrees, but maybe you're going to have sub-agents, maybe you're going to fork your agent. Like, you have to be able to express that. And then I think the least important thing is understanding the tooling of the LLM, like the thing I was just describing, like how to use the tooling. It is a thing you need to do, but we'll elevate the tooling to the people if the people have the skills. We'll necessarily do that.
Yeah, and the one thing I think I would add to that is a level of precision in what you're saying. Because, again, in my experience, I've seen where I've tried to be a little verbose, thinking I was helping, the LLM would often take that as mixed signals coming in and would not be as efficient in coming up with a solution.
Yes. You have to be precise and contained. It's
Yes.
Encapsulation.
100%.
Right. It's just software encapsulation. That's all it is. With a clear set of boundaries, clear interfaces. The things that we learned in computer science classes, to the extent that you learn them there, those are still true. You're expressing them in different ways. My wife was a litigator. Turns out litigation is very technical. But when you go in front of a jury, you've got to get them to where you are. Her job, not that different than our job in some ways. But you also have to be compelling. Turns out in this new world, as an engineer, if you want to have impact, you need to be compelling. By the way, that was also true before.
Yeah. Well, I think that the crux of this, at least in my estimation, is algorithmic thinking. And in my experience, people who can kind of think algorithm, and I mean, obviously, as software people, we get trained to do this, and to your point, attorneys very much. My wife is a lawyer as well. Very much the algorithmic thinking and kind of laying the fact patterns out and kind of walking you through a series of logical steps to get to a conclusion. Part of their training as well. I think, in my experience at least, the product managers that are good are the ones who can think that way, and the ones that can't quite cut it are just, they're too narrative in their thinking. It's storytelling, which, by the way, is a very valuable skill in some aspects of it. But when it comes to really disciplined, constrained expression of thought that you can convey to an engineer, more importantly an LLM, that's a tough one. I mean, that's where they struggle.
But I think the differentiation is that algorithmic thinking is good for the prompts, and the storytelling and the laying the foundation is the context. And you need to be able to do both.
Yeah, I think there's an element of decomposition as well that's important.
Yes.
Storytellers aren't always good at being decomposers.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and then the last thing to say, in kind of traditional interactions, and this maybe goes back to the handoffs, in the traditional interactions, often what you would get is you would get these narratives, and then engineers would close the gap, right? They would take those and they would actually say, all right, this is how it's going to end up living in code. But now that the lines are blurring, either the LLM is going to do that for you, or you're going to have to get better at doing that yourself, because maybe there is an engineer, maybe the engineer's job's kind of transitioning to getting the clearly defined, here's what I need, here's it's all laid out, and I'm just going to translate that into how technically that's going to happen. But I'm not going to still close that gap of translation of requirements to, I don't even know how to describe it well, but I think, do you get my point?
No, I do. Engineers used to complain to me all the time, probably still do, is they're asking me for dates on this. They want to know when this thing is going to get done. And I don't know, because I'm going to discover 5 things.
Right.
And what I've always said, maybe not always said, what I've said for quite a long time is, oh, you'll get it done by that date. And the engineer said, how would you know? And I said, because they did not define the problem well.
Something will get done for sure by that date.
That their lack of specifics means that you you have optionality on what you're going to do.
Right.
So I don't think that changes. I think that stays the same. And as we're talking, as we're working with, large language models, as we're working with coding tools, we'll still do that. We still have that same ability. Now we've given up some of it to, once again, Codex or, Claude Code or whatever. It's just there. And I don't know your experience, but at some point it's like, you know what? I got no more mental cycles to prompt this thing. This is just going to be good enough.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm sure Bill and I have both experienced. I'm done. I'm done with this session for the day. Time to take our winnings and go home. So let me ask you one more final kind of question, which is, future facing. So if you play this out, I don't even know how long is too long in this world, but let's say 2 to 3 years, just not too far in the distance, but something that has some time has to go between now and then. How is this changing? Where is this going? How is this evolving? You've mentioned you're probably going to see some people kind of emerge as the new type of product manager. You're probably going to see some positions and roles change, like what QA is about. You're probably going to see all these things. Like, where's it all going? What is your view of the world in 3 years?
Well, 3 years is a really long time.
It's almost impossible to ask this question these days, because I don't know what a reasonable time frame would even be to think about. Maybe a year. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, here's why I think we're going eventually. I can either answer where we're going like tomorrow, literally like tomorrow, or like 10 years from now. Any between that, like, it's really hard to size up what's going to happen. But I think clearly all engineering as we know it today goes away, right? We have a lot more power, a lot more leverage, and all those skills that we used to be really important. As you said, Alex, like, no longer do we code like animals do. You said it in a much better way. It was really funny. I wish I remembered it. So our skills to be able to break apart, to analyze, to synthesize becomes more impactful and more powerful. All those things that, look, I started to learn to code because I'm a nerd and an idiot, like in binary, because I wanted to, right? Like, no one even knows what that means anymore, or soon. No one will know what that means anymore. Why should they? No one will be as stupid as I was. But be able to have that conversation, to be fluid. This is where Steve Jobs does matter. This is where that liberal arts comment does matter, is to be able to think and have impact on the big side and understand architecture on the small side. That stays true. To be able to be a director of engineering or a manager of engineering as we know them today, those are the skills that become important on the engineering sense. On the product management sense, those things we say before, I don't think that ever changes. That's all first principle stuff. What we don't know is, okay, great, I've got 20 simultaneous agents running right now. Great. I'm a manager of engineering. Wonderful. Oh, now I've got 1,000. Now what do I do? Slightly feel Jensen Huang, right? CEO of NVIDIA. He has something like 80 direct reports. And when I heard that, like that doesn't make any sense to me. How do you have one-on-ones?
He doesn't.
That's the answer. That's the answer. He doesn't have one-on-ones. That's the answer, right? He's like, why do I need to do one-on-ones? I just got have meetings with group people, and everyone has to listen. And I'm Jensen Huang, and so they have to respond when. Now I don't know how they do annual reviews, and the answer is they probably don't. Like I don't know what but he like we're going to. My vision, as far as I can go, is mapping what we have today, what gets written. Like, okay, there's a hole here. How do I do it here? How do we do it? That's kind of what I presented. I've got more thoughts on that with more details, but what does it mean when I have to be Jensen Huang, like with 3 orders of magnitude bigger? Good luck to all of us. Like, we'll figure it out. I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And even more basic things like, is there going to be a time where your product organization is just product managers and AI, and that's the end of it? No engineers, just...
Well, the answer to that is clearly yes. The answer to that's clearly yes, right?
Yeah, probably a matter of time more than anything. Although I will say, there is something to be said for having an engineer look at the file code that's being produced.
Either that or we drastically redefine what a product manager is.
Yeah, but also, like, you're looking at code now. Here's the thing that I think a lot of people don't agree with me. I don't know if I care about code quality. If I can redevelop code so quickly and I can QA it so quickly, and so long as I can test for security, I cared about code quality because I needed to maintain the code in the future.
Right.
And I was going to change this part or change that part. If I can change it all in 5 minutes, why do I spend time on code quality?
Well,
why am I,
Yeah, Bill. Why would you spend time on code quality?
Hey, let Bill hop in on this one.
Please.
No. To an extent, I agree. The place where I don't agree is you wake up to the $25,000 token bill that you paid yesterday because your code wasn't really efficient. That's the kind of thing where code quality is a broad definition, and efficiency is one of those definitions. And that's the kind of thing where I think engineers tend to be useful. The other place, the Axios hack. I mean, that was massively distributed before anybody knew what was going on because it was being adopted via chain adoption when people were using libraries that they had no idea were later, downstream using Axios, right? But
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing an engineer thinks about, like, what version are you using? That thing was an issue 2 months ago. It's not just CISOs, and the whole security thing is, and which I agree with you 100%, makes perfect sense. But what security is I think is going to really be changing a lot.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that we have a bunch of practices in our industry that all came to existence for some reason. And some of those reasons are still valid, and some of those reasons are no longer relevant. And you almost have to kind of go through, all the clean code stuff. Why do you write clean, beautiful functions and clear separation? Because you have to read that code a year from now, somehow have a fighting shot at understanding what the hell it's doing so you can change it. If that's no longer an issue, why spend the time and I'm not necessarily defending this position, by the way, but I'm kind of trying to go along.
You should.
But I think it's a fair question to ask. Why make the investment? Because nothing is free. That takes time and effort to do all that, and unless there's a good reason to do it anymore, why do it? And frankly, I don't think as an industry we've kind of come to a place where we're actually looking at all the practices, all the things that are considered best practices in engineering, and are really asking, is this still a thing that's necessary, and why? And to Bill's point, there may be a bunch of new stuff like token optimization.
Steel team.
but like I think there would be new practices that you need to add because of the world you're in now.
Absolutely.
But I'm sure a bunch of stuff no longer applies. That's a very, very fair point.
Well, everyone always quotes, or everybody, maybe just me, always quotes eventually Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, or some other luminary of industry. So here's my Elon Musk. He didn't actually say this, but I'm going to pretend he did. If some of the rockets don't blow up, you have not taken away enough parts. You need to. So I just spent $25,000 in token last night. Oh, that sucked. How do I not do that again? But what I don't want to do is impede my progress. And now I don't want to blow up something like, I guess all your money at your bank accounts are gone. Like that's a little too late, right? That's why security still matters. But I spent $25,000 on tokens one night, and I'm a reasonably sized company, but I've produced products 5 times faster. That's a great trade-off.
And it's not always clear. I think that's part of the challenge. It's not always clear when that investment is going to yield the great payoff, or when I had a situation, an engineer spent like $3,000 in a weekend because agents tend to get overboard if they start calling each other and just spinning for no reason.
What did you learn from that $3,000?
From that, I learned that Claude Teams is a tool to be used very, very carefully, because if you set up a thing where one agent is writing code and the other agent is the QA will keep finding errors, because that's what QA does, until the machine melts down. So you gotta have some controls in place for that.
Great. And what process did you put in place?
Right. Well, stop using Teams to start with.
Great. But my point is,
yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, learning has been had, a painful learning. And to your point, that's how you learn, because something painful happened and now you're adjusting your process. But I guess the point I was making is, you don't know a priori that this big investment in tokens is going to actually yield something useful, or is just going to be a wild adventure that you're going to learn something from, but maybe that's okay.
Well, I think that's the whole point of our conversation is we're walking into this vast unknown where we know a lot of the stuff we used to know is just wrong and it's going to impede us. And we don't know where the right controls are. And so we're just going to have to get a little naked for a little while till we find out we're cold.
Yep. Yeah. Until the next version of extreme programming emerges that says these are the disciplines, or whatever version of agile in AI and agentic development. These are the new disciplines and practices that make sense, that are valuable, and you should be doing because of the tools you have at your disposal. Yes.
Right. And it's going to go faster and faster because these, we're creating new models all the time. This is back to the thing we said 5 minutes ago. We're going to create
the state of the art keeps moving at a rapid pace.
It's a rapid pace, and we're just going to have to strip off some clothes for a little while till we find out which ones we got to.
And by the way, the state of the art isn't always the right direction, as we've seen with a few missteps by the biggies.
That's
Very
right.
true. Very true. Okay, well, this has been an absolute delight of a conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your thoughts on product and engineering and where it's all headed.
No problem. Excellent.
Awesome.
Glad to be here. Of course, glad to always see you guys. And thanks for doing this.
Thanks for being here. Well, if you found this topic or topics like this one interesting or relevant to you, LA CTO Forum has lots of opportunities to engage on these topics and more with other CTOs. If you're interested in learning more, find us on LinkedIn or on the web at lactoforum.org. Until next time, may your deployments be smooth and your tech debt manageable.
And remember, if you can't handle the exception, at least log it properly. We'll catch you next time.